The call came on a Tuesday afternoon in late August, while Judge David Reynolds was reviewing case files in his chambers at the Chicago Federal Courthouse. His clerk knocked softly on the door, her face flushed with excitement. "Judge Reynolds, the White House is on line 1. David looked up from his desk, removing his reading glasses. At 48 years old, he'd been a federal appellate judge for 6 years, and before that, a district court judge for 8. He'd built a reputation as a brilliant legal mind, fair but firm, with a particular expertise in constitutional law and civil rights. He was also one of only 12 black federal appellate judges in the entire country. "The White House?" David repeated, his heart rate picking up slightly. "Yes, sir. They said it's urgent." David picked up the phone, pressing the button for line 1. "This is Judge Reynolds." "Judge Reynolds, please hold for the president." David's breath caught. He'd known this moment might come. There had been rumors swirling for months that Justice Morrison was planning to retire, and David's name had been floated in legal circles as a potential Supreme Court nominee. But hearing it now, the reality of it, made his hands shake slightly. "David," the president's voice was warm and familiar. They'd met several times at legal conferences over the years. "I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." "No, sir. Not at all." "Good. David, I'm going to cut right to the chase. Justice Morrison submitted her retirement letter this morning, and I want to nominate you to replace her." David closed his eyes, letting the magnitude of those words wash over him. The Supreme Court. The highest court in the land. A lifetime appointment. The opportunity to shape American jurisprudence for decades. "Mr. President, I'm honored. Truly honored. I know your record, David. I've read your opinions. You're brilliant, principled, and you understand what it means to apply the law fairly to everyone, regardless of their background. That's exactly what this country needs right now. When would you like to make the announcement?" "Friday. We'll do it at the White House, prime time. Your confirmation hearings will start in 3 weeks, and if all goes well, you'll be sworn in by the first Monday in October, the start of the new Supreme Court term." David's mind was already racing ahead. The hearings would be brutal. The opposition party would dig into every case he'd ever ruled on, every speech he'd ever given, every article he'd ever written. They'd try to paint him as an activist judge, as too liberal, as unqualified. But David had been preparing for this his entire career. "Mr. President, I won't let you down." "I know you won't, David. We'll be in touch with the details. Congratulations, Justice Reynolds." The line went dead. David sat in his chair for a long moment, staring at the phone. Justice Reynolds. It felt surreal. His clerk appeared in the doorway again. "Sir, is everything all right?" David looked up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "Sarah, I need you to clear my calendar for the next 8 weeks." "8 weeks? Judge, we have oral arguments scheduled." "Cancel them, reassign them, do whatever you need to do." David stood up, straightening his tie. "I'm going to be a little busy." The announcement was made that Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. The president stood in the East Room of the White House, flanked by David Reynolds and his wife, Dr. Alicia Reynolds, a pediatric surgeon. "My fellow Americans," the president began, "it is my honor to nominate Judge David Reynolds to serve as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States." The room erupted in applause from the assembled guests, senators, legal scholars, civil rights leaders, and David's family. Judge Reynolds has dedicated his life to the law and to justice. As a federal judge, he has demonstrated intellectual rigor, judicial temperament, and an unwavering commitment to the Constitution. He will be an outstanding justice, and I urge the Senate to confirm him swiftly. David stepped to the microphone, his hand shaking slightly as he gripped the podium. "Mr. President, thank you for this incredible honor. I am humbled and grateful for your trust in me." He paused, looking out at the cameras. Growing up in South Side Chicago, the son of a postal worker and a school teacher, I never imagined I'd stand here today. But this is what makes America extraordinary. That a kid from a working-class neighborhood can rise to the highest levels of our justice system. His voice grew stronger, more confident. If confirmed, I pledge to uphold the Constitution faithfully and impartially. I pledge to apply the law equally to all people, regardless of their wealth, their power, or the color of their skin. And I pledge to remember that behind every case is a human being whose life and liberty hang in the balance. The room erupted in applause again. The announcement made headlines across every major news outlet. Legal experts praised the nomination. Civil rights organizations celebrated. And the opposition party immediately began sharpening their knives for the confirmation hearings. But David was ready. He spent the next 2 weeks in preparation, meeting with senators, reviewing his past opinions, conducting mock hearings with a team of lawyers who peppered him with hostile questions. By the time the confirmation hearings began, David Reynolds was as prepared as any Supreme Court nominee had ever been. The hearings lasted 4 days. David faced hours of questioning from senators on both sides of the aisle. They asked about his judicial philosophy, his views on precedent, his interpretation of the Constitution. The opposition tried to paint him as soft on crime, as an activist judge, as someone who would legislate from the bench. But David was unflappable. He answered every question with precision and clarity. He cited case law from memory. He explained his reasoning and past opinions with such thoroughness that even his critics had to admit he knew what he was talking about. On the 4th day, the committee voted 12-10 to recommend his confirmation to the full Senate. 2 weeks later, the Senate voted 52-48 to confirm him. David Reynolds would become the 116th Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States, and only the 3rd black man ever to serve on the court. His swearing-in was scheduled for Monday, October 7th, the first day of the new Supreme Court term. But before that Monday arrived, David had one last weekend as a private citizen, and that weekend he decided to take a road trip. David Reynolds loved to drive. It was one of the few activities that allowed him to clear his mind, to think through complex legal problems without interruption. Some judges preferred to work out their logic through writing. David preferred the open road. He'd taken Friday off, his last day before officially becoming a Supreme Court justice, and decided to drive from Chicago to Washington, D.C., where he'd be living for the foreseeable future. It was a 700-mile trip, about 11 hours of driving, but David didn't mind. He'd pack some audiobooks, stop for lunch somewhere in Ohio, and arrive in D.C. by evening. His wife, Alicia, had flown out earlier in the week to oversee the movers and set up their new house in Georgetown. Their 2 kids were away at college, so it was just David, his thoughts, and the highway. He left Chicago at 6 a.m., driving his silver Lexus sedan, a practical, understated car that fit his personality. He wore jeans, a plain blue button-down shirt, and his old law school baseball cap. No suit, no tie. No indication that he was about to become one of the 9 most powerful jurists in America. He wanted to be anonymous for one more day. The drive through Indiana was uneventful. Flat farmland stretched out in every direction, broken occasionally by small towns and truck stops. David listened to a biography of Justice Thurgood Marshall, taking notes mentally on Marshall's approach to civil rights cases. By noon, he'd crossed into Ohio. He stopped for lunch at a small diner off I-70, ordering a cheeseburger and fries. The waitress called him Hun and didn't recognize him. It was perfect. He was back on the road by 1 p.m., making good time. If traffic stayed light, he'd arrive in D.C. by 6 or 7 p.m., in time to have dinner with Alicia and get a good night's sleep before the swearing-in ceremony on Monday. But around 3 p.m., as he was driving through rural Pennsylvania, David's phone rang. It was his brother, Marcus, calling from Chicago. "Marcus, hey, what's up?" "David, where are you right now?" "Pennsylvania." About 4 hours from D.C. Why? You need to turn around. David frowned. What? Why? Mom's in the hospital. Heart attack. She's stable, but the doctors say the next 24 hours are critical. David's heart dropped. A heart attack? When? About an hour ago. She was at home, felt chest pain, called 911. They got her to Northwestern fast. She's in the ICU now. David's mind raced. His mother, Dorothy Reynolds, was 72 years old. She'd been healthy, active, but she had a history of high blood pressure. This wasn't completely unexpected, but the timing was devastating. How bad is it? Bad enough that you need to come home, David. She's asking for you. David looked at the highway stretching ahead of him, then at the rearview mirror behind him. Washington was 4 hours east. Chicago was 7 hours west. And his swearing-in ceremony was in less than 48 hours. I'm turning around, David said without hesitation. Tell Mom I'm on my way. Drive safe, David. And David? Yeah? Don't speed. Last thing we need is you getting pulled over by some small-town cop who doesn't know who you are. David managed a weak laugh. I'll be careful. He hung up, immediately exiting the highway and turning back west toward Chicago. He called Alicia, explaining the situation. She was devastated but understood. Your mother comes first, Alicia said firmly. We'll figure out the ceremony. Just get to her safely. David drove for 3 hours, his mind a whirlwind of worry and planning. He'd call the Chief Justice, explain the situation, see if they could delay the swearing in by a day or two. His mother was more important than any ceremony. By 6 p.m., he was back in Ohio, making good time. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the highway. That's when he saw the speed limit sign, 55 miles per hour, and his speedometer, 72 miles per hour. And a second later, the blue and red lights flashing in his rearview mirror. No, David whispered. No, 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 not now. But the lights were insistent. David sighed, slowing down and pulling onto the shoulder of the rural 2-lane highway. His heart was pounding, not from fear of the ticket, but from the delay. Every minute he spent on the side of the road was a minute he wasn't with his mother. He rolled down his window and placed both hands on the steering wheel, visible and non-threatening. It was a routine he'd learned as a black man in America, the same routine every black parent taught their children. The officer who approached was in his late 50s with a thick gray mustache and a gut that suggested too many years of donuts and desk duty. His name tag read, Sheriff Coleman. Sheriff Harold Coleman had been law enforcement in this rural Pennsylvania county for 34 years. He'd been sheriff for the last 12. He ran unopposed in every election, mostly because no one wanted the job in a county with more cows than people. Coleman was set in his ways. He didn't like outsiders, he didn't like change, and he especially didn't like black folks driving through his county in fancy cars. License and registration, Coleman barked, shining his flashlight directly into David's face. Good evening, officer. Sheriff, Coleman corrected, his tone sharp. License and registration, now. David kept his voice calm and respectful. Of course, Sheriff. I'm reaching for my wallet now. It's in my back pocket. Hurry up, I don't have all night. David retrieved his wallet and pulled out his driver's license, an Illinois license with his name, photo, and address. He handed it over along with the car's registration. Coleman snatched them without looking at David's face. He examined the license under his flashlight. David Reynolds, Chicago. Long way from home. What are you doing in Pennsylvania? I'm driving back to Chicago, Sheriff. My mother is in the hospital. It's an emergency. Coleman grunted, unimpressed. You were doing 72 in a 55. That's 17 over. That's reckless driving in this state. I understand, Sheriff. I apologize. I wasn't paying attention to my speed. I'm just trying to get to my mother. Everyone's got an excuse, Coleman interrupted. Step out of the car. David's stomach dropped. Sheriff, is that really necessary? I was speeding, yes, but I said step out of the car. David took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Sheriff Coleman, with all due respect, what is the probable cause for asking me to exit my vehicle? Coleman's face reddened. Probable cause? You were speeding. That's cause enough. Now get out of the car before I add obstruction to the charges. David calculated his options. He could refuse, cite his Fourth Amendment rights, but that would escalate things. He could tell Coleman who he was, that in less than 48 hours he'd be a Supreme Court justice, but that felt like pulling rank, something David had never been comfortable doing. No, better to comply, get the ticket, and get back on the road. I'm stepping out now, David said, opening the door slowly. He stepped onto the gravel shoulder, the cool evening air hitting his face. Coleman looked him up and down, his eyes lingering on David's jeans and casual shirt. This your car? Coleman asked. Yes, Sheriff. It's registered in my name. You can see that on the registration. A Lexus. Nice car. How'd you afford a car like this? David's jaw tightened. I'm a federal judge. I work for a living. Coleman's eyes narrowed. A judge. Sure you are, and I'm the president. The Sheriff, I can provide identification. Turn around. Hands on the car. Sheriff, this is excessive. Hands on the car, now. David complied, placing his palms on the hood of his Lexus. Coleman patted him down roughly, his hands invasive and unnecessary. Where are you really going? Coleman asked, his breath reeking of tobacco. You running drugs? Guns? I told you, my mother is in the hospital. Yeah, I've heard that one before. You people always have a sob story. You people. The words hung in the air like a slap. David closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. He'd heard those words before, too many times. In college, when a professor questioned whether he'd really written his own paper. In law school, when a classmate suggested he'd only gotten in because of affirmative action. Even on the bench, when a defense attorney implied he was biased because of his race. But hearing it now on the side of a rural highway, from a sheriff who had no idea who he was, it stung just as much as it always had. Sheriff Coleman, David said, his voice controlled but hard, I am a federal appellate judge. My name is David Reynolds. If you Google me, you will see that I was recently nominated to the Supreme Court of the United States. My confirmation hearing was 3 weeks ago. I was confirmed by the Senate. My swearing-in ceremony is on Monday. But right now I need to get to Chicago because my mother is in the ICU. So please, just give me the ticket and let me go. Coleman laughed, a cruel, mocking sound. Supreme Court, right. You expect me to believe that? A judge wouldn't be driving around in jeans and a baseball cap. I'm off duty. I'm a private citizen right now. You're a liar, Coleman said. And you're under arrest for reckless driving, false impersonation of a government official, and suspicion of drug trafficking. David's blood ran cold. Drug trafficking? You have zero evidence. I don't need evidence. I have probable cause. You're nervous. You're sweating. You're acting suspicious. Those are all signs of drug activity. I'm nervous because my mother is dying. David's voice rose despite his best efforts. I am not carrying drugs. I am not a criminal. I am a federal judge, and you are violating my constitutional rights. We'll see about that, Coleman said, grabbing David's wrist and pulling it behind his back. The handcuffs clicked into place, biting into his skin. You're making a mistake, David said, his voice tight with anger and desperation. The only mistake here is you thinking you can talk your way out of this, Coleman said, shoving David toward the patrol car. As Coleman pushed him into the back seat, David looked at his phone, still sitting in the cup holder of his Lexus. He needed to call his brother. He needed to call Alicia. He needed to let someone know where he was. But Coleman grabbed the phone, scrolling through it briefly before pocketing it. You'll get this back when you're processed, Coleman said. The patrol car door slammed shut with a finality that made David's stomach drop. He was under arrest. Less than 48 hours before he was supposed to be sworn in as a Supreme Court justice, he was sitting in the back of a sheriff's car, handcuffed, in rural Pennsylvania. And no one knew where he was. The Clearfield County Jail was a small, outdated facility that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1980s. Coleman pulled into the secure garage at the rear of the building, and David was hauled out of the back seat and led inside. The booking area smelled of industrial cleaner and desperation. A deputy sat at the desk, looking half asleep, barely glancing up as Coleman pushed David forward. "What do we got, Sheriff?" the deputy asked, yawning. "Traffic stop. Guy was doing 72 in a 55, then tried to lie his way out of it. Says he's a Supreme Court justice." Coleman laughed. "Can you believe that?" The deputy finally looked at David, taking in his appearance. Black, mid-40s, dressed casually, handcuffed. "A Supreme Court justice, huh? That's a new one." "I am telling the truth," David said, his voice firm. "My name is David Reynolds. I am a federal appellate judge, and I was confirmed to the Supreme Court 3 weeks ago. My swearing-in ceremony is on Monday. I need to make a phone call." The deputy exchanged a glance with Coleman. "Sheriff, did you check his ID?" "Of course I did. Illinois driver's license. Says his name is David Reynolds, lives in Chicago. But that doesn't make him a judge." "Did you Google him?" the deputy asked. Coleman frowned. "Why would I waste my time Googling every criminal who makes up a story?" David couldn't believe what he was hearing. "It would take you 30 seconds to verify what I'm saying. Just type my name into Google. David Reynolds, federal judge, Supreme Court. You'll see my confirmation hearings. You'll see the president's announcement. You'll see everything." "Or," Coleman said, leaning against the booking desk, "you're just some con artist who memorized a fake story. I've seen it before. You people think if you sound smart and use big words, we'll believe you." You people. There it was again. David took a breath, forcing himself to stay calm. Anger wouldn't help here. He needed to think strategically. "Deputy," David said, addressing the younger man directly, "I am invoking my right to make a phone call. Under Miranda, I am entitled to contact an attorney." "Phone's out of order," Coleman said quickly. "That's not true," the deputy said, frowning at Coleman. "The phone works fine, Sheriff." "It's been acting up all day," Coleman insisted. "We'll let him make his call in the morning after he's processed." David's eyes narrowed. "Sheriff Coleman, are you intentionally denying me my constitutional rights?" "I'm not denying you anything," Coleman snapped. "You'll get your phone call, just not right now. We've got procedures to follow." "What procedures? This is a basic traffic stop that you've escalated into a false arrest. You have no evidence of drug trafficking. You have no probable cause, and you're violating the 4th, 5th, and 6th Amendments right now." Coleman stepped closer, his face inches from David's. "You want to lecture me about the law? You think you're smarter than me because you can name some amendments? I've been enforcing the law in this county for 34 years. I know what I'm doing." "Then prove it," David said. "Google my name. Right now. Prove I'm lying." Coleman stared at him for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he turned to the deputy. "Process him. Put him in holding. I'll deal with the paperwork." "Sheriff, maybe we should just—" "I said process him," Coleman barked. The deputy sighed, standing up. "Come on, Mr. Reynolds. Let's get you printed and photographed." David was fingerprinted, photographed, and stripped of his belt, wallet, and watch. His belongings were placed in a plastic bag, and he was led down a hallway to the holding cells. The cell was 8 feet by 10 feet, with a metal bench, a stainless steel toilet, and nothing else. The walls were concrete, painted a dingy beige. The fluorescent light overhead flickered. The deputy removed David's handcuffs and stepped back. "I'm sorry about this, Mr. Reynolds. Sheriff Coleman can be difficult." "Difficult is one word for it," David said, rubbing his wrists. "Deputy, I need you to listen to me. I am telling the truth. I am a federal judge. My swearing-in ceremony is on Monday. My mother is in the hospital in Chicago, and I need to get to her. If you just Google my name, you'll see everything I've told you is true." The deputy hesitated. I'll see what I can do." "Please," David said. "Just Google it. That's all I'm asking." The deputy nodded and left, locking the cell door behind him. David sat down on the metal bench, leaning his head back against the wall. His mind was racing. He needed to get out of here. He needed to call his brother, call Alicia, call the Chief Justice. People would be looking for him by tomorrow morning at the latest. But what if he couldn't get to a phone? What if Coleman kept him here all weekend? The swearing-in ceremony was Monday morning. If David wasn't there, it would be a national scandal. The president would have to find another nominee. The Senate would have to hold new hearings. And all because some small-town sheriff with a badge and a grudge decided David looked suspicious. David closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. He'd faced worse than this. He'd overcome poverty, discrimination, and doubt to get where he was. He'd argued cases in front of hostile judges. He'd faced down senators during his confirmation hearing. He could handle Harold Coleman. But first, he needed someone to realize he was missing. 2 hours passed. No one came. David paced the small cell, running through his options. Option 1. Wait for someone to notice he was missing. But who? Alicia thought he was on the road. Marcus thought he was driving carefully. No one expected to hear from him until later tonight. Option 2. Wait for Coleman to process him and allow a phone call. But Coleman seemed intent on delaying that as long as possible. Option 3. Hope that the deputy, who seemed less hostile than Coleman, would actually Google David's name and realize the truth. David sat back down, his head in his hands. And then he heard footsteps in the hallway. The deputy appeared, holding a tablet computer. His face was pale. "Mr. Reynolds," the deputy said quietly, "I Googled you." David looked up, relief flooding through him. "And? You're telling the truth. You're actually going to be a Supreme Court justice." "Yes," David said, standing up. "I am. Now please, let me out. Let me make a phone call. I need to get to Chicago." The deputy unlocked the cell door, his hands shaking. "Mr. Reynolds, I am so sorry. Sheriff Coleman, he doesn't know. I tried to show him, but he wouldn't look. He's convinced you're lying." "Then show him again," David said, stepping out of the cell. "Show him the news articles. Show him my confirmation hearing. Show him the president's announcement." "I will, but—" The deputy paused, looking nervous. "Sir, Sheriff Coleman is the elected sheriff of this county. He has a lot of power. If I go against him, I could lose my job." David put a hand on the deputy's shoulder. "I understand. But right now, you have a choice. You can do the right thing, or you can be complicit in a constitutional violation. What's your name?" "Daniels. Deputy Tom Daniels." "Tom, you seem like a good man. You know this is wrong. Help me fix it." Tom hesitated, then nodded. "Okay. Come with me." Tom led David back to the booking area, where Sheriff Coleman was sitting at the desk, filling out paperwork. He looked up as they approached, his face darkening. "What the hell is he doing out of his cell?" "Sheriff, I need to show you something," Tom said, holding up the tablet. "I Googled his name. He's telling the truth. He's a federal judge. He's been nominated to the Supreme Court." Coleman didn't even glance at the tablet. "I don't care what Google says. Anyone can make a fake website." "Sheriff, this is CNN, the Washington Post, the White House website. These are legitimate sources." "Or they're elaborate fakes," Coleman insisted. "I'm not falling for it." David stepped forward, his patience wearing thin. "Sheriff Coleman, you are making a massive mistake. When people realize I'm missing, there will be a federal investigation. The FBI will get involved. And when they find out you arrested a Supreme Court justice designate without cause, held him illegally, and denied him his constitutional rights, your career will be over. Is that really what you want?" Coleman stood up, his face red. "You threatening me, boy?" David's jaw clenched at the word boy, but he kept his voice level. "I'm not threatening you. I'm warning you. You still have a chance to fix this. Let me make a phone call. Let me prove who I am. And then let me go." "No," Coleman said flatly. "You're not making any calls tonight. You're staying in that cell until Monday morning, when you'll be arraigned in front of Judge Whitmore. He'll decide if your story is real." "Monday morning?" David's voice rose. "My swearing-in ceremony is Monday morning." "Then I guess you'll miss it," Coleman said, smirking. "Maybe next time you'll think twice before speeding through my county." David stared at him, disbelief and anger warring in his chest. This man, this petty, racist, small-minded man, was going to cost him everything. "Sheriff Coleman," David said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You just made the biggest mistake of your life." "Is that right?" Coleman stepped closer. "You think you scare me? I've dealt with plenty of criminals who thought they were smarter than me. They all end up in that cell, just like you." "I'm not a criminal," David said, "but you are. You're guilty of false arrest, unlawful detention, deprivation of rights under color of law, and obstruction of justice. And when this is over, you'll be the one in a cell." Coleman's hand went to his baton. "Get back in that cell, now, before I add assaulting an officer to your charges." Tom stepped between them. "Sheriff, please, just let him make a phone call. What's the harm?" "The harm," Coleman said, his voice cold, "is that I'm the sheriff, and what I say goes. Now take him back to holding. That's an order." Tom looked at David, his expression apologetic. "I'm sorry, Mr. Reynolds." David nodded. "It's okay, Tom. You tried. But I need you to do something for me." "What?" "Call the FBI. Tell them a federal judge is being held illegally in Clearfield County Jail. Give them my name. They'll handle the rest." "I can't." "Yes, you can," David said firmly. "You have a duty to report this. You know what's happening here is wrong." Tom looked at Coleman, then back at David. His face was torn. "Take him back," Coleman barked. "Now!" Tom sighed, leading David back down the hallway to the cell. As they walked, David whispered, "Tom, my mother is in the ICU in Chicago. She's dying. If I don't get there, I'll never forgive myself. Please, make the call." Tom didn't respond, but David saw the conflict in his eyes. The cell door slammed shut again, and David was alone. He sat down on the bench, his mind racing. Someone would notice he was missing eventually. His brother, Alicia, the Chief Justice. But would they realize it in time? Saturday morning, 7 a.m. Marcus Reynolds called his brother's phone for the 15th time. It went straight to voicemail. "David, where are you? Call me back, Mom's asking for you." Marcus hung up, his stomach churning with worry. David had said he was turning around, driving back to Chicago from Pennsylvania. That was 16 hours ago. He should have arrived by now. Marcus tried calling again, straight to voicemail. He called Alicia. "Have you heard from David?" "Not since yesterday afternoon," Alicia said, her voice tight with worry. "He was in Pennsylvania, turning around. He should have been in Chicago by midnight at the latest." "His phone is going straight to voicemail. I'm getting worried." "Me too," Alicia admitted. "What if he had an accident? What if he—" "Don't think like that," Marcus said quickly. "I'm going to call the Illinois State Police, see if there are any reports of accidents." "I'll call the Pennsylvania State Police," Alicia said. "And Marcus? If we don't find him in the next hour, we need to escalate this. David's supposed to be sworn in on Monday. If he's missing, people need to know." Marcus hung up and immediately dialed the Illinois State Police. 20 minutes later, he'd confirmed there were no accident reports involving David's vehicle. Alicia called back. "Pennsylvania State Police have nothing either. But Marcus, I'm looking at his location history on our shared Find My Phone app. The last ping was yesterday at 6:37 p.m. in Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, right off I-80. Then the phone went dark. Clearfield County, Marcus repeated, already Googling it. That's rural, middle of nowhere. What if he was pulled over? Then they would have let him go by now. Unless... Marcus's blood ran cold. Unless something went wrong. I'm calling the FBI, Alicia said. This is a federal judge. If he's missing, they need to know. Do it. I'm calling his law clerk and the Chief Justice's office. Within 30 minutes, the wheels were in motion. The FBI's Philadelphia field office was notified. The Chief Justice's office was alerted. And a quiet panic began to spread through the legal and political establishment. David Reynolds, Supreme Court Justice Designate, was missing. Saturday, 10 a.m. Special Agent Jennifer Park of the FBI's Philadelphia field office pulled up to the Clearfield County Sheriff's Office, accompanied by 2 other agents. She'd received the call an hour ago from the Washington field office. A federal judge was potentially missing in Clearfield County, last known location a highway off I-80. Jennifer had been with the FBI for 12 years, specializing in civil rights violations and public corruption. She had a feeling this was going to be one of those cases. She walked into the sheriff's office, her badge out, her expression all business. I'm Special Agent Park, FBI. I need to speak with Sheriff Coleman immediately. The deputy at the front desk, Tom Daniels, looked up, his eyes widening. The FBI, what's this about? Sheriff Coleman, now. Tom hurried to the back, returning a minute later with Coleman, who looked annoyed at being disturbed. Can I help you, Agent? Coleman asked, his tone dripping with false politeness. Yes, I'm looking for a missing person. Judge David Reynolds, federal appellate judge. He was last seen in this county yesterday evening. Do you have any information about his whereabouts? Coleman's face went pale, but he recovered quickly. Reynolds? Yeah, we've got a guy by that name in holding. But he's not a judge. He's a speeding suspect who lied about his identity. Jennifer's eyes narrowed. You have David Reynolds in custody? If that's his real name, yeah, but he's lying about being a judge. He's probably got warrants or something. Sheriff Coleman, take me to him, right now. I don't have to... Yes, you do, Jennifer said, her voice cold. You have a federal judge in your custody, and you're obstructing a federal investigation. Take me to him now, or I will arrest you for obstruction. Coleman's bluster evaporated. Fine. Follow me. They walked to the holding cells, and Jennifer's heart sank when she saw David through the bars, sitting on a metal bench, still wearing his jeans and button-down shirt, his face exhausted. Judge Reynolds? Jennifer called out. David looked up, relief flooding his face. Agent Park? You know her? Coleman asked, confused. I testified in one of her cases 3 years ago, David said, standing up. Unlawful detention lawsuit. Agent Park, thank God you're here. Jennifer turned to Coleman, her expression furious. Open this cell, right now. Coleman fumbled with his keys, unlocking the door. David stepped out, and Jennifer immediately assessed him for injuries. Are you hurt, Judge? No, just exhausted. Sheriff Coleman arrested me yesterday evening for speeding, then refused to let me make a phone call or verify my identity. I've been here for 16 hours. Jennifer turned back to Coleman, who was now visibly sweating. Sheriff, you arrested a federal judge without verifying his identity? You denied him his constitutional right to a phone call? He didn't look like a judge. What does a judge look like, Sheriff? Jennifer asked, her tone icy. Coleman had no answer. Judge Reynolds, do you want to press charges? Yes, David said without hesitation. False arrest, unlawful detention, deprivation of rights under color of law. I want him prosecuted to the fullest extent. Understood. Jennifer nodded to the other agents. Arrest Sheriff Coleman. What? Coleman backed up. You can't. Sheriff Harold Coleman, you are under arrest for violating Title 18, U.S. Code Section 242. Deprivation of rights under color of law. You have the right to remain silent. As Jennifer read Coleman his rights, David turned to Tom Daniels, who was standing in the doorway, looking shocked. "Tom, you tried to help me. I appreciate that. If you'd like to provide a statement to the FBI about Sheriff Coleman's conduct, I think it would be helpful." Tom nodded quickly. "Yes, sir. I'll tell them everything." David retrieved his belongings, including his phone, which had been turned off and stored. He powered it on, and immediately it exploded with notifications. Dozens of missed calls from Marcus, Alicia, his law clerk, and the Chief Justice's office. "I need to make some calls," David said. "Of course," Jennifer said. "We'll give you some privacy, but Judge, I'm arranging a helicopter to take you directly to Chicago. Your family has been worried sick." "Thank you, Agent Park. I appreciate that." David stepped outside the sheriff's office into the cool October morning. He dialed Marcus first. "David?" Marcus answered on the first ring. "Where the hell are you?" "I'm okay. I'm in Pennsylvania. Long story, but I'm okay. How's Mom?" "She's stable. Asking for you. Can you get here?" "The FBI is arranging a helicopter. I'll be there in a few hours." "FBI? David, what happened?" "I'll explain when I get there. But Marcus, call a press conference for Sunday afternoon. There's something I need to say." Sunday afternoon, Chicago. David Reynolds stood at a podium in front of Northwestern Memorial Hospital, flanked by his wife, Alicia, his brother, Marcus, and Special Agent Jennifer Park. Behind them, a large banner read, "Press Conference, Judge David Reynolds." The crowd of reporters was massive. Every major news outlet was there. The story had broken overnight. A soon-to-be Supreme Court justice had been arrested by a small-town sheriff who refused to believe he was a federal judge. It was a national scandal. David looked out at the cameras, his expression serious. "Good afternoon. My name is David Reynolds, and as most of you know, I was confirmed by the Senate 3 weeks ago to serve as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court. My swearing-in ceremony is scheduled for tomorrow morning." He paused, letting that sink in. "But 2 days ago, I was arrested by Sheriff Harold Coleman of Clearfield County, Pennsylvania, while driving to visit my mother, who had suffered a heart attack. I was pulled over for speeding, which I acknowledge I was guilty of. But what happened next was a gross violation of my constitutional rights." The crowd was silent, hanging on every word. "Sheriff Coleman profiled me. He saw a black man driving a nice car, and he immediately assumed I was a criminal. He refused to verify my identity, even when I told him who I was. He denied me my right to make a phone call. He held me in a cell for 16 hours, despite having no probable cause and no evidence of any crime beyond a traffic violation." David's voice grew stronger. "Sheriff Coleman called me boy multiple times. He told me you people always have excuses. He mocked the idea that a black man could be a federal judge. And when his deputy tried to show him proof of my identity, news articles, video of my confirmation hearing, the president's nomination announcement, Sheriff Coleman refused to even look." A reporter raised her hand. "Judge Reynolds, what would have happened if the FBI hadn't found you?" "I would have been held until Monday morning, when I would have been brought before a local judge for arraignment. I would have missed my swearing-in ceremony, and the president would have had to nominate someone else." Another reporter. "Are you pressing charges against Sheriff Coleman?" "Yes. The FBI has arrested Sheriff Coleman for deprivation of rights under color of law. He will be prosecuted in federal court. But this isn't just about one sheriff. This is about a system that allows people like Coleman to abuse their authority with impunity." David looked directly into the cameras. "I am a federal judge. I have resources, connections, and a platform. And even I was profiled, arrested, and denied my rights. Imagine what happens to people who don't have those advantages. Imagine how many black men, Latino men, poor people, are sitting in jail cells right now because some officer decided they looked suspicious." He paused, his voice thick with emotion. "My mother is upstairs in the ICU right now. She's stable, thank God. But I almost didn't make it to her bedside because Sheriff Coleman decided that a black man in a nice car must be a criminal. That's not justice. That's racism with a badge. The reporters erupted with questions, but David held up a hand. I'll take a few questions, but then I need to get back to my mother. Judge Reynolds, will this incident affect your views on the Supreme Court? David nodded. It already has. I've always believed in the Constitution, in the rule of law, in equal justice under law. But this experience reminded me that for too many people, those are just words. They don't reflect reality. And as a justice, I will fight to make those words real for everyone. What's your message to law enforcement? My message is simple. Do your job with integrity. Treat every person with dignity, regardless of their race, their appearance, or their economic status. Because the moment you let prejudice guide your actions, you've betrayed your oath. Will you be sworn in tomorrow as planned? David smiled. Yes, I'll be sworn in at 10 a.m. in the Supreme Court chambers, and after that, I'll get to work making sure what happened to me never happens to anyone else. The press conference ended, and David walked back into the hospital with Alicia. They took the elevator to the ICU, where Dorothy Reynolds was awake and sitting up in bed. David, she said, her voice weak but steady. You made it. David hugged his mother gently, careful not to disturb the wires and tubes. I made it, Mom. I'm here. I saw the news, Dorothy said, her eyes glistening. That sheriff, he treated you like, I know, Mom, but it's okay. He's facing justice now. Dorothy reached up and touched David's face. My son, the Supreme Court Justice. I'm so proud of you, David. I couldn't have done it without you, Mom. You taught me to stand up for what's right. You taught me to never let anyone make me feel less than. That's what I'm going to carry with me to the court. Dorothy smiled. Then you'll be a great justice. Monday, October 7th, 10 a.m. The Supreme Court chamber was filled to capacity. Senators, members of Congress, legal scholars, civil rights leaders, and David's family all sat in the ornate room, waiting for the ceremony to begin. Chief Justice William Bradford stood at the center, holding a Bible. Beside him, David Reynolds stood in his new judicial robes, his hand raised, ready to take the oath. Alicia stood next to him, tears streaming down her face. Marcus was in the front row, grinning, and watching via video link from her hospital room, Dorothy Reynolds sat up in bed, refusing to miss her son's moment. The Chief Justice began. Please raise your right hand and repeat after me. I, David Reynolds. I, David Reynolds. Do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons. Do solemnly swear that I will administer justice without respect to persons. And do equal right to the poor and to the rich. And do equal right to the poor and to the rich. And that I will faithfully and impartially discharge and perform all the duties incumbent upon me as an Associate Justice of the Supreme Court of the United States under the Constitution and laws of the United States. So help me God. So help me God. The room erupted in applause. David lowered his hand, overwhelmed with emotion. He'd done it. Despite everything, despite Sheriff Coleman, despite the arrest, despite nearly missing this moment, he'd done it. He was a Supreme Court justice. The Chief Justice shook his hand. Welcome to the court, Justice Reynolds. Thank you, Chief. After the ceremony, David held a small reception in the Supreme Court's East Conference Room. As he shook hands and accepted congratulations, a young black law student approached him nervously. Justice Reynolds, can I ask you something? Of course. What you went through this weekend, how did you stay calm? How did you not lose hope? David thought about it for a moment. I stayed calm because I knew who I was. Sheriff Coleman tried to make me feel like a criminal, like I was less than. But I knew the truth. I'm a federal judge. I've dedicated my life to the law, and no one can take that from me." He put a hand on the student's shoulder. "That's what I want you to remember. No matter what anyone says, no matter how they try to diminish you, you know who you are. Hold on to that." The student nodded, tears in his eyes. "Thank you, Justice Reynolds." Weeks later, Sheriff Harold Coleman stood in a federal courtroom, facing charges of civil rights violations. David had offered to testify, but it wasn't necessary. The evidence was overwhelming. Deputy Tom Daniels had provided a detailed statement. The FBI had recovered deleted files showing Coleman had a history of racially profiling black drivers. Coleman pleaded guilty to avoid trial. He was sentenced to 3 years in federal prison and permanently barred from law enforcement. David didn't attend the sentencing. He had more important work to do. On his first day on the Supreme Court bench, David heard oral arguments in a case about qualified immunity for police officers. The lawyer for the police argued that officers should be protected from lawsuits unless they violated clearly established rights. David leaned forward, his voice cutting through the courtroom. "Counsel, let me ask you this. If an officer arrests someone without probable cause, denies them their constitutional rights, and refuses to verify their identity even when presented with evidence, should that officer be immune from liability?" The lawyer hesitated. "Well, Your Honor, it depends on the specific circumstances. It's a yes or no question, counsel. Should that officer be immune?" "No, Your Honor." "Good," David said, "because that's exactly what happened to me 2 weeks ago. And if I, a federal judge, can be treated that way, imagine what happens to people without my resources. Keep that in mind as you argue your case." The courtroom was silent, and in that moment, everyone understood. Justice David Reynolds was going to change the Supreme Court. David Reynolds sat in his chambers, reviewing briefs for the next day's arguments. His first year on the court had been everything he'd hoped for: challenging, exhausting, and deeply meaningful. He'd written opinions on voting rights, police accountability, and criminal justice reform. He'd become the court's most vocal advocate for protecting the rights of the powerless and holding the powerful accountable. And he'd done it all with the memory of that night in Clearfield County Jail fresh in his mind. His clerk knocked on the door. "Justice Reynolds, you have a visitor." "Who is it?" "Deputy Tom Daniels from Pennsylvania." David's eyebrows raised. "Send him in." Tom walked in, looking nervous but determined. "Justice Reynolds, I'm sorry to drop by unannounced." "It's fine, Tom. It's good to see you. Have a seat." Tom sat down, wringing his hands. "I wanted to thank you, sir. After everything that happened, I decided to leave law enforcement. I'm in law school now, first year, and it's because of you." David smiled. "Because of me?" "Because you showed me what justice really looks like. You could have been angry. You could have been bitter. But instead, you focused on making sure it never happens to anyone else. That's the kind of lawyer I want to be." David stood up, walking around his desk to shake Tom's hand. "I'm proud of you, Tom. You did the right thing when it mattered. That takes courage." "Thank you, sir." "And sir, one more thing. I wanted you to know your mom is doing great. I saw her on the news last week. She was at some civil rights event in Chicago." David laughed. "Yeah, she's become quite the activist. Says if her son is going to be a Supreme Court justice, she's going to make sure he doesn't forget where he came from." "Sounds like a good mom." "The best," David agreed. After Tom left, David stood at the window of his chambers, looking out at the Capitol dome in the distance. He thought about the long road that had brought him here, the poverty, the discrimination, the doubt. And he thought about Sheriff Coleman, sitting in a federal prison, finally facing consequences for his actions. Justice, David reflected, wasn't always swift, but when it came, it was beautiful. Before we wrap up, I want to ask you something. What would you have done in Justice Reynolds' position? Would you have told the sheriff who you were immediately? Would you have stayed calm? Or would you have lost your temper? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this story moved you, if it made you think about justice and accountability, please hit that like button. It really helps us reach more people with these important stories. Also, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. We post powerful stories like this every single week. Stories about karma, justice, and people getting exactly what they deserve. Share this video with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who's ever been profiled, who's ever been judged unfairly, who's ever been told they're less than. Let them know they're not alone. Thank you so much for watching. Subscribe to Obsidiana Files for the next one. Sheriff Harold Coleman served his 3-year sentence and was released in 2027. He now works as a custodian and speaks at police training seminars about the consequences of racial profiling. Deputy Tom Daniels graduated from law school and now works for the ACLU, specializing in police misconduct cases. Justice David Reynolds continues to serve on the Supreme Court, where he's become one of the most influential voices for civil rights and criminal justice reform. Dorothy Reynolds made a full recovery and frequently attends oral arguments to watch her son on the bench. And the case that started it all? Reynolds versus Coleman became landmark precedent, making it easier for victims of police misconduct to sue officers who violate their rights. Justice was served.